All right, it's right at 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for AI in Action. We're really glad you're here, and I'm gonna go do a little intro and give some housekeeping stuff while more people come in, and then we'll get started. Across the digital landscape, expectations are shifting quickly. The people you serve no longer are just browsing websites. They're asking questions and expecting direct, relevant answers in return. At the same time, AI is changing what's possible for your teams, making it easier to test ideas, streamline workflows, and build solutions faster than ever before. So today is really about bridging those two shifts. So now, before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping items. First, thank you all for joining us live today. You're all going to receive a copy of the webinar recording in your inbox in the next few days. And then second, we're going to have Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A box at any time during the session, and then we'll just take them in the order that they're received at the end. You're also welcome to use the chat throughout the webinar to share your comments, reactions, or ideas. Just make sure to toggle what to say, send your messages to everyone versus just to one person or the speaker so that everyone can see and engage that way. Before we dive in, a quick introduction into who we are. At Forum One, we're an award-winning digital agency focused exclusively on mission-driven organizations. So for more than 30 years, we've partnered with nonprofits, foundations, and government agencies to help them better serve their audiences through research, strategy, design, data, and technology. We've worked with over 1,000 organizations across more than 2,500 projects, and increasingly that work includes helping teams navigate emerging technologies like AI. At the core, what we do is simple. We help organizations turn their ideas into impact. Joining us today is one of our partners. We have Alex here from Dewey. Dewey builds expert grade answer engines for organizations whose content matters. They've delivered over 1.5 million answers across 30 plus partners, and their philosophy is one we really connect with. They don't believe in AI that pretends to know everything. They believe in experts who actually know something, and they help those experts share it. So let me introduce our speakers. To the far left, there's Jenn Johnson. Jenn is a senior client partner here at Forum One. She works closely with organizations on digital strategy and helping many of our clients think through how AI fits into their broader ecosystem. Alex Tryon in the center is the founder of Dewey. She's been at the forefront of building practical AI solutions for mission-driven organizations, particularly around search and content experiences. And then I'm Cassandra Swenson, Enterprise Marketing Manager here at Form One, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation and just keeping us on track. And then for our agenda, to give you a quick sense of where we're headed today, we'll start with the big picture of what's changing and why it matters, then move into search and content strategy, walking through real examples, and close with practical ways you can start experimenting with AI on your own team. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jenn to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Cass. All right. So, why are we here? What is the big zoomed out picture of what has changed across work in the last two years? And overall, I think we all know it, but just to summarize and ground us, the interface itself has changed, and it's really just about this new shift to natural language. So for decades, interacting with technology meant, we had to learn its language. We clicked through menus. We found our way through settings. We learned how to write code. We had to kind of guess the right keywords and search for things. Navigating menus, hunting for content, and my favorite, hitting Control F once you've got to something, and so you can kind of find the exact paragraph to maybe start with. And that's not to say that's broken. That still works in a lot of cases. It's a lot of us still, need that good, proper information architecture organization. But overall, the shift here is that now you can just say what you want. Say what you need to do, and natural language, and the technology, figures out the rest. So, Cass opened our webinar saying what we're here to cover today. It's broadly about AI, but I really want to kind of frame it with this lens of what the natural language piece has has brought to us, as opposed to, general user interfaces, clicking and pointing or coding, which is that it's democratized things for us, both access to information, access to sort of advanced knowledge, and access to advanced skills even. And we think there's a big opportunity for mission-driven organizations like ours, like yours, like all of us. So that opportunity, it shows up, and I want to be really clear kind of about this two pillar idea that we have in this webinar. It shows up in two places. First, in your audiences, how your audiences are finding information. Your constituents, donors, community members, they're increasingly coming to the web, not to navigate, but just to ask. They type full questions, of course, now into Google, and we all know this. We see this ourselves. My 7th grade daughter knows it, because even though ChatGPT is blocked by their school system, Google is not, and so they know how to just kind of use Google AI overviews to have natural language conversations. So it's not just technology folks or folks that are knowledge workers. People are going to, but a lot of people more and more are going to specific tools: ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, etc. And their expectations are shifting so that they want a direct and clear answer to a specific question that they have, not necessarily a library to browse through. And again, I want to be really clear that this isn't an either or scenario. The libraries, these repositories, are all still very valuable. There's a lot of people who still want to consume the full richness of those things, but a lot more and more are coming with this answer in mind, this question in mind, to get an answer. Now, that was about the audiences. And I want to be, really clear about this kind of second pillar of how natural language and AI has changed work for mission-driven organizations, and that's how you and your team work. So that same shift that democratized, access to information, advanced knowledge, is democratizing what's advanced skills that change what's possible for you and your staff. You all have been doing this for 2 years now, but using these tools to write content, draft content. Of course, we always recommend the human in the loop on the beginning and end of those workflows, but analyze or also analyzing large data sets. And now I'd say in the last near term, weeks, months, we're really seeing a heavy shift in democratizing, again, the ability for us to use natural language to design and build products, prototypes perhaps, and that might be where we need to kind of stay for a while, and automation tools, things that used to require specific programming language or technical skills or significant time to understand. Those things can now be done just by describing what you need in plain language. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know the right tool. Maybe you need to know a few tools. If you pick your LLM, and Alex and I will get into that. You just need to know what you want to accomplish, and have the the energy to experiment, to get there. I used to be really amazed by people who could write scripts or create macros and thought they were like magicians and wizards, and those sorts of things, again, are sort of now available. So it's really so again, that's what we're covering today, is how most organizations are navigating this new emerging possibility, all of these additional access to information and skills at the same time. And you're all being asked to do more with less. We know that that's the mantra we're hearing day in and day out from organizations that we partner with. So we're going to cover today, some ways to get started on that. And I'll turn it over to Alex, who will start us off by talking about the audience piece, or one part of the audience piece, which is search behavior and how search behavior is changing.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I'm excited to meet all of you. Let me just start by giving you kind of a quick timeline, because this has all happened really fast. So it may feel like ChatGPT has been here forever. It sometimes does for me, but it launched in November of 2022. So within 2 months, it had 100 million users. Today, we're closer to 900 billion weekly active users, just an insanely large number. And what happened is that just started to shift expectations really quickly. And as we all know, Google responded and has introduced its own products. So AI overviews in Google launched in May of 2024. I'm sure that all of you felt that impact in one way or another, most likely in your kind of search traffic. And so at this point, we've had some time to track this. And I put together this graph because it really just jumped out at me to think about how the behavior has changed. So if we go back to 2020, 54% of searches were one and two words. So what we think of as a traditional keyword. Um, just go a couple of years, ahead. January 2025, that had dropped to 42%. It's a drop, but it's not huge. 6 months later, so that second stat at the bottom, the 31% is June of 2025. That's almost a year ago now. We don't have data. That's kind of this year's study hasn't been done yet. I imagine this is much lower. Keywords as we know them are going away. They're being replaced. I like to think they're growing up, right? They're growing into full queries, into questions, into context that show what people are really looking for. And there's lots of trade-offs there. Those full queries are way more likely to trigger an AI overview in Google, which is way less likely to trigger a click to your site. And we'll talk about AO and SEO and some of those trade-offs a little bit here soon. Um, but they're even getting longer than that. So if we look at ChatGPT alone, the average prompt is now 23 words. So that's a fully formed thought from someone. So um, just to make this really practical, I was thinking about kind of searches that I've done, and one of them was like, what are the benefits of recess, or maybe even just recess, is what we would have seen in the logs in the past. Now we're seeing something like, what is the impact on test scores when kids have more or less recess time in the third grade in a public school? And that's the level of expectation that users are bringing to their thought. They've fully thought through what they're thinking about. Um, I will say that our product provides both a chat and a search interface, and we still do see lots of keywords. It's sometimes it's 30%. For some of our partners, it's still 50%, but the behavior has changed. So when someone's typing in recess, they're way less likely to be looking for the 40 articles that you've written that reference recess, and they're way more likely to be just testing the waters to understand what you might have. And so if they see results there, we also show them suggested questions they can ask, and that is the path that people tend to follow. They then are like, oh, right, I can just ask my question. I can get straight to what I want. And then I know you have something in that space. So just a kind of a subtle but significant change. And I think there's a pretty exciting silver lining for organizations, which is when these searches are happening on your site, they're so much richer. So, you might learn something from knowing that people are searching recess, but you learn so much more from that detailed query that helps you inform the work that you're doing, the content that you're creating, and just lets you know what's important to kind of your constituents. So just kind of double clicking on this a little bit more. I've been thinking a lot about search intent and how search intent is changing as these tools change. So there were, there were three traditional buckets. So you could say navigational, which is I'm trying to get somewhere specific, certainly still exists. Informational, I'm trying to learn something, and transactional, I'm trying to do something. And for most of us, those have been treated as separate lanes. So the way that you optimized your pages was around those different intent types. How did you help people follow those tracks? And what I'm seeing happen now is I'm seeing those threads braid together because someone can ask a question and be looking for all of those things in one place. So, the example I shared here is, how do I apply for SNAP benefits in my county? The old model would probably route that to an informational page, just explaining how the process works. But today, that answer could provide, a very clear navigational link to my county portal. It could provide the answer to how to do it, and it could help them actually transact by saying, are you ready to get started with that? Here's the first step. And in an agentic model, it could actually help them through that process. And so this is taking what was maybe a need to optimize content in a different way into all these separate threads and making for a opportunity that I think is ultimately much better for a user they don't need to think about which of their intents they're using. They can kind of just speak, as Jen was saying, like just the way our brains work. This is a remapping system for all of us. And then you could get that kind of rich data from them in their own words, which is also a huge benefit.
So, what do we do now with at our organizations now that we understand a little bit more about the challenge or the new ways that search is working, or the way search intent is showing up differently, and one emerging, or it's been around for a while, is this conversation around AEO or GEO, used interchangeably, generative engine optimization or answer engine optimization. And Forum One did a whole webinar on this, which much longer and more in depth than I'm going to cover today, but wanted to touch on some of this to give you, if you didn't attend that, or if you did, a refresher with some kind of substantive tactical ideas that you can take away. Alex mentioned this, or 60% of traditional searches now end without a click. You've seen this probably in your own analytics, and that number jumps much higher when the AI overviews are present on Google, for example. So even if historically your content is ranked well, fewer people, or they're showing up, fewer people are kind of sometimes landing on your pages. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We are seeing cases where conversions are up as a result when you have the most authoritative content in those results. But the point is, it's not just about ranking. It's about whether your content itself is authoritative and has enough expertise to show up, and is structured well enough to be read by LLMs to show up in those AI generated answers. Now, I want to be really clear. We're not saying you need to write for the machines. Humans want this too. Humans want to trust your organization. They want to see your credibility. They want to see, that you're partnered with organizations, that lend credibility, or that you're lending credibility to them alternatively. So again, it's not that this is for the machine, but it does help raise these signals so that humans and LLMs are really able to consume and understand the best answers, the best content to generate these answers. So here's a practical exercise we've been doing with some of our partners to figure out how to make sense of this. This isn't the only way to do it, but it's one that we've been experimenting with and seeing. Start by thinking about or generating a bunch of questions that you think your audiences have about your work, about your organization, about the topics that your organization owns or cares about, the domains that you want to be experts on. If you don't, I'm sure you could come up with many on your own, and there's other ways that you can get these. Source them, of course, from others in your organization. Think about, donor calls, or the contact forms on your website is often a great way to see kind of all the questions that people came to you with, or even within your Google Search Console. If you're using that tool, you could kind of see what people are searching that they haven't already found, or that they want to get quickly, and kind of extrapolate some questions from there. There's also tools like Answer the Public or Also Asked that can help you generate these. So anyway, point is, try to come up with as many questions as you can, maybe up to 100. And then there's some tools out there where you can monitor the LLM's answers to these questions over time. There's tools you can kind of go search them. We're not going to put a particular strong recommendation around any. Just to name a few, though, so the landscape to look at: Peekaboo Prompt Watch. We use one called Peek.ai. And ultimately, these tools take those questions and run them through, the different LLMs: ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google AI Overview, Claude, et cetera. And you get to kind of pick and choose which ones. There's kind of pricing not issues, but pricing differences you have to think about it with those things. And watch it over time. We are starting with, a short period of time, a month, and see how your organization or your content is showing up, if at all. And there's two ways that this can come up. The branded, so that's your organization search, the organization's name appears in the answer directly, or is asked in the question directly, or unbranded, where your work outputs, your content, your products, your research, your data is cited as a source in these answers, even without your name attached, but hopefully cited, to continue to give you domain authority or to drive people to your pages. Both of those matter. So want to be clear, it's not an either or, it's a blend, and it really depends on your digital goals, which one you're more, to what extent the balance between the two, how that would shift. So I'll give you an example. I volunteer with a local nonprofit. If you've worked with me or know me, you've heard me talk about it all the time. Near and dear to my heart here in Seattle, called Rain City Rock Camp. It's a music youth program for gender marginalized youth. They also have adult programs, but its traditional flagship program is a summer camp, and then they have kind of the traditional things, after school programs, workshops. So what we would want to see is if people are asking, what does Rain City Rock Camp, or what does Rain City Rock Camp do, we want to see that the answers that are being generated are like correct and from our content, and not from some news article written 10 years ago that has shifted, where our maybe our programs or our mission is expanded or shifted, and so we'd want to kind of monitor to see that accuracy in these results. Another, for the non-branded approach, would be, if somebody, this would be, the huge win is if somebody searched for us, at least because of our digital goals, searched, what are great music summer camps to send my kiddo in Seattle, and if we came up in the results with a accurate description of what we do. So with these kinds of tools, you can monitor to see to what extent those are true, and then you have some opportunities to do something about that. So what are those opportunities? So you typically find yourself in one of a few situations, and I'm not like a black and white person where it's like either one, two, or three things are happening, but generally speaking, one of these things will come up, and there may be others. But either you don't actually have written content that answers the questions that people are asking. So you hope that you show up for this question, but turns out you've got a real gap. You thought you did. Maybe something's been unpublished. Maybe anyway, you have a content gap. It's not showing up. Or another scenario is that there's a structural issue on your digital properties, your website, your other tools, your data platforms, where the content isn't correctly structured semantically or in a schema sense. And that's a little bit technical, but we've got a really great guide on this, and Cass can throw some of these in the chat for everybody. For example, early on in this conversation, we at Forum One discovered that sometimes content that was not displayed on the initial page load, again, thinking specifically about websites here, wasn't displayed on the initial load. It was, in a drawer or an accordion or a tab. The LLMs weren't originally finding them. Some of these things may shift over time. It's all very bleeding edge, but we really want to be sure that we're structuring the content, and there's schema involved there. And again, semantic structure, H1s, H2s, those kinds of things that you need to be sure you're doing, just to make sure is the stuff I'm putting out there even accessible by these tools. So that's kind of the other potential avenue that you might find as you examine to what extent your orgs are showing up in these. Or a bigger one. This is hard, but it's kind of where, I'm not going to say the most bang for your buck, but like this is really where there's a big opportunity if it's aligns with your digital goals, is that your content, you thought it's there, it exists, you're answering the question, but maybe it's not authoritative enough. It's not showing the experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And that acronym is EEAT. If you've been working in SEO, you know this from a long time. It's been around for a long time. They've recently expanded the acronym to have another E in there. But it's essentially Google's framework, and Google's not the only player in this game, but it's a fair like baseline evaluation for evaluating content quality. And LLMs, bottom line is they use similar signals. Again, it's not that this is the only approach, but they use those similar signals regardless of their framework. So that in plain language, this just means don't just say you do something, show how you do it. Show on the ground reporting, impact data, name your authors and include their credentials. There's a lot here, and it might sound like we're saying boil the ocean. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. Start small, do it on your high value pieces. Just kind of weave this into your digital strategy and your editorial comms over time. It's really not trying to make it overwhelming where you have to go back and rewrite all of your content, but do these things and put it into your plan going forward. Maybe that's the easiest place to start. Cite your sources, highlight your partnerships with authoritative organizations, universities, governments, etc. So just generally speaking, to sum that up, the more your content demonstrates real humans with real expertise, the more likely it is to be surfaced as a trustworthy answer. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just the machines that want this. More and more, we live in a disinformation society, and people need this too. Is the bottom line there. Let's see. I think we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So we just talked about how to optimize your content so AI systems can find it and surface when people are asking questions elsewhere, like on Google or ChatGPT or wherever they're searching. The other side of the coin, and what Alex is going to talk to us about next, is, again, if we remember this frame of natural language, is there an opportunity to build that same natural language experience, that ask a question, inquiry-based experience, directly with your own content, in your own digital properties, so that people don't have to be asking the external products or tools, and you have a little bit more of a guardrails around what answers they're getting. So Alex will, I'll kick us off, and Alex will talk to us a little bit more about what we did for this customer. So if you've been to our webinars before, and maybe some of our partners from this organization are with us today, but we often love to talk about our longstanding partnership with University of Wisconsin's Population Health Institute. They run a really great program called, an amazing, incredible program called County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. And within that, there's a particular tool, particular team product called What Works for Health. What Works for Health is a database. That sounds dry, but it's a huge source of knowledge around evidence-based strategies, and by strategies, policies, programs, things that community leaders, government leaders, educational leaders can literally take and have ideas for implementation or putting into their kind of community plans for improvement. So it's this evidence-based strategies for improving community health, and it's so rich, it's so deep, it's so authoritative. They've got so much great structure and metadata around it. Evidence rating is there, implementation examples, sources cited. It's exactly the sort of thing that people need, and it is a big volume of content. So what we've done for many years, and again, I would not say that this is broken, but the traditional experience in place, and you all probably have, similar places like this in your digital property, similar experiences or sections like this, is a traditional web search. And again, that's typically keyword. Sure, it's probably smart. Maybe if it's advanced, it has predictive search, or can give you more rich results in your when you've executed that search. But either way, it's a keyword search. Lots of filters. That's super helpful when you do want to kind of cross mix, just like when you go shopping on Amazon and you're like, I want this brand and this size. Lots of filters. I want this strategy or approach, and I want this topic, and then you get your list. That's great. You now have a body of smaller body of things to look through, and you click into each, and you read them. You spend time digesting them, looking for something. And we hypothesize that a lot of times people are coming with a question in mind, and that's a lot of steps to get the exact answer to that question. Again, we don't want to harm the idea that this depth of information is here. So it wasn't necessarily broken, but we did hypothesize that, again, user behavior is changing, and inquiry is an interesting, this inquiry-based experience is an interesting option, and we might learn something new about audience needs and how we could continuously improve them if we experimented with this. So with knowing that users are going to be coming with these specific questions, we wanted to meet them there and see if we could give them direct answers first and open the door to that deeper exploration. So we brought in our partners, Alex, and their product Dewey, to explore that.
Yes, and this is easily one of my favorite projects I've had a chance to work on. Selfishly, because when we build a Dewey system, we as a team get a chance to become, minor experts on a new topic. And this was a new topic for me. And this is incredibly rich data, as Jen was saying. Um, what we ended up building together, we call EV. And EV is short for evidence, and it's a natural language interface that's trained on the full What Works for Health content library. So that includes everything that exists on the website, but also some internal resources that explain their methodology, some related site sections, some kind of internal kind of background information. And so users can still do keyword matching if they want to come in with a general kind of high level question, but they can also ask questions any way they'd like. And what we're excited about when we started to build this is what that opened up was a lot of kind of um, cross policy opportunities. So because someone's asking a question, and the way the current navigation setup, it was kind of direct you to kind of either a couple of choices, and you could look at them individually. But by the nature of questions, we could bring them together and we could stitch in options or how they fit together with one another, which is also a really powerful change. And so just a few things to kind of think about and how we built this and what made it unique. Probably the most important one is that this is a deeply controlled experience. So it is trained on specific content. It is not using the open internet. So what that means is that you're going to get a lot of I don't know, because that's the honest answer to a lot of questions. And you're also going to hit up against boundaries that we designed together with the What Works for Health team. So if you ask for the best way to lower obesity in your community, you're going to get a response that says, we don't determine best because best is too individualized to a community and individual, circumstances. Here's some of the policies that are scientifically supported. And that is a choice. A different organization might have said, actually, we do have a stance. We have a best, and we want it to answer that. And that's okay as well. And similarly around all sorts of other places where we wanted to draw those boundaries, and those are different with every organization we worked with. We also designed the system to encourage curiosity. And so if you come in with a question, we've pre-generated thousands of questions that we know are answerable by this data. And so we'll answer your question, but we'll also show you questions that you could ask to help you go deeper. And that often opens up pathways for people because you've started from a place you're trying to lower smoking in your neighborhoods and your community, but you don't maybe think about the connection between smoking and access to local health clinics. But it might draw your attention to that connection via the way a follow-up question is written for you. And so that's been an exciting component of this. And then really critically, it cites sources from within the library. So users can always go deeper and go read the kind of original research as it was written, and see kind of that full data. The user experience, though, I would say is really only half of the story. The other half is the incredibly rich data that this provides back to the organization. So, for example, and for any What Works for Health folks on the call, I ran this yesterday, so you haven't seen it yet. But I was just curious. And so I took the last couple of months of queries and I asked it to bucket them into categories and then compare those categories to the way that navigation is currently designed on the site. And it very quickly helped us find a interesting observation. that while there's a clinical care category in the navigation, there's not explicitly a mental health category. But if we looked at the queries, questions about mental health were by far the single largest bucket. So that shows us an opportunity. We could then click into that deeper and say, is this trending? Has this increased? Has it always been like this? Is it maybe reacting to something that's in the news? And does that maybe change what policies we should think about adding to the system in the future? Or, what communications we should be sending out to our community? So it's one of my favorite things about this product is the insights, and we also get insights from the questions that can't be answered. We save all of those. We think of them as knowledge requests. Someone is requesting information from you that's outside of what you have today. That is a great indication of where you may want to put your attention in the future. So really, really proud of this work together, and we'll drop a link into the chat here so you can play with it as well. Find some boundaries for yourself.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so at the top of this webinar, I talked about these kind of two pillars of our conversation. So we're going to switch gears now and talk about the other side. So that was all focused on audience behavior, how natural language tools, this whole shift to using natural language has allowed the shift in audience expectations around search intent, around how you can use that to better meet your audience's needs through content strategy. So I want you to take off that hat and put on your staff productivity hat. What's also changed, as I said, is now you don't you no longer need necessarily to have the exact right tooling, the exact right advanced skills. Using natural language tools like Claude Cowork. There's kind of emerging ones around OpenClaw that's maybe a little on the super experimental side, but these tools can help you all save time and redirect that time towards those audience needs and your programmatic goals. And so that's what we're going to switch gears and get into next.
Awesome. Yes. So throwing another question out to the group, just to feel free to think about this one. I'd love it if you drop it in the chat as well, because maybe we can talk about your specific examples. But just take a moment and think about what is the most repetitive part of your job, the work that you do, and specifically the thing that eats your time, but maybe doesn't need your expertise. And I suspect we all have these things. And I throw this out here because I think sometimes when we think about where to get started with AI, it's easy to get stuck in the big picture. What's our AI strategy going to be? What's the impact of AI going to be in our space? What vendor should we work with? But I'd like us to just step back a little bit and think about starting with just what do I do every week that I wish I didn't have to do? Because I think that's a great place to kind of dip your toe in. And so, building from there, I think about getting started with AI in two big buckets. The first is, where can you remove drudgery? So, what are tasks that are important for some reason, but they distract you from the work that really needs you and kind of your human genius? And the second is doing things that just don't work well at human scale. So, something that AI is uniquely good at is pattern recognition and analysis and synthesis across huge volumes of information, which is something that we're good at as humans as well, but we often don't have the time and the capacity to read that huge stack of reports or look through thousands of user queries to look for trends. So let me give you some concrete examples, and if I see some repetitive tasks show up in the chat, I'll talk about some of your examples as well. But here's one of mine. So meeting note takers. I haven't looked, but I suspect we have a few in attendance. I would be surprised if we didn't. And I've been at a couple of meetings recently where the note takers out counted the humans. And it's easy to set and forget them. And I would say that I was in that category. I actually had a meeting note taker running for the better part of a year before I really knew why I was doing it. And then something clicked because I realized that once I started to trust the note taker, which was step one, I stopped taking my own notes. I'd occasionally jot something down, but I started being more present in the meetings and more engaged with the people that I was speaking with because I trusted that the system, and the system for me is granola, but there's lots of them. I trusted that it was doing its job. And then once I trusted that it was doing its job, I built a little workflow for myself so that when a meeting ended, I would take the granola notes and I would ask them to give me my follow-ups. And I would drop those follow-ups into my to-do list. And so I trusted the system to kind of have those notes and to help me organize them, and I could make my tweaks. And it's a small thing, right? But our days are filled with small things. And I didn't realize that that felt like drudgery to me until I wasn't doing it. Until I realized I could get off a call and fill up my water bottle and stretch my legs and do the other things that are important for us, instead of, spending another 20 minutes kind of sorting through my handwritten notes and converting them to my Asana and kind of getting them all organized. And this one actually feeds straight into bucket two as well, because once we had been running these note takers as a team for a little while, I realized that we had kind of a pretty large folder full of them. And so I ended up taking a couple of months worth of partner calls and giving them into a folder and giving them to Claude. And I asked it to look for product opportunities, for trends in what people were asking us about. And it was such an exciting moment because there was a really clear trend in a solution that multiple partners had asked us for, but they had used such different language and framing in how they had asked that those of us on the team who had been on those calls hadn't seen it. We'd recorded them as individual, very different product requests, but by being able to look at the file as one and look across those 50 call notes at the same time, Claude could see the thread, and it could point that out to us and give us an opportunity to really delight our partners, with something that it turns out it was pretty easy for our team to build. And so, that kind of analysis at scale is something that, in a dream world, a product team gets to do once a year, maybe, but it's not something that you can do kind of willy-nilly the way that you can with AI. You can ask, now the file exists. Now the folder is updated every time we have a partner call. Now we can ask whenever we want for anything that we want to ask. And that's felt really powerful. So start here. Start about just thinking about, are there donor conversations that you're having that have follow-ups that you want to track, or community feedback sessions where you're trying to keep track of themes, without just oversimplifying. You want the texture of what they're saying, and maybe your notes kind of simplify them. Just think about places where there's information already flowing through your org that you might be able to unlock in some way that's a little bit easier to do with these tools.
Give me a sense of.
Okay, so I know we've got, a pretty big group on today, and everyone will be at a different place in their journey. Um, I'm starting to think of kind of the AI adoption journey like a ladder. So, some of us are on rung one, which is maybe you've tried ChatGPT or Claude a couple of times. Maybe it was helpful, maybe it didn't, maybe it wasn't, and if it wasn't, it might have been easy just to kind of walk away and feel like, okay, that's not for me. I'll deal with it later. Rung two, I would guess, is where a lot of people are, which is you're using it occasionally. It's great at helping you clean up the language of an email, or, brainstorm ideas about something. But, you're not using it as part of your kind of day to day. I would say in a lot of ways, rung two is the danger zone. And the reason for that is, you're using the tool, but you haven't really started to find its edges, which means it's harder to understand where it's brilliant and where it falls apart. There's kind of a level of depth, before you start to understand, because AI can feel like magic, and it's not. It makes mistakes. It has lots of things it can't do, even if it thinks it can. And it has lots of things it can do that you might not realize it could. And to start to understand those, I would like everybody to kind of if you're making a goal for yourself from this session, aim to get into what I'm calling the tinkering zone. And I think of this as daily use. It doesn't have to be optimized. This doesn't mean you've gotten it just right. I don't, this is the journey we're all on, and the tools are changing and we're changing. But this is really building a habit. Um, and that means kind of you're really pushing at its edges so that you can find opportunities. Maybe you can share with your peers, you can share with colleagues and trade notes because you're actually testing it enough that you're figuring out what works. So if you're thinking about this journey, I have kind of three pretty specific tips for you to think about. One is pick one tool and commit to it. It doesn't matter what it is, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they all have pros and cons. If your organization has a partnership with one, great, go with that. It's probably fine. Um, but it does matter that you go deep with one rather than shallow across multiple because of a couple of things. One is you personally will get to know the tool and its nuances and what it responds to and what prompts work better, but also it'll get to know you. So these systems are designed to build context over time. So if you're asking for help, filling out a grant application, and you're doing that multiple times, it's going to understand the type of information that you tend to put in to these applications, and it's going to get better at helping you write the next one. But if you're jumping between accounts or if you're not logged in, you're not going to get any of that kind of additive benefit over time. And, so for me personally, I use Claude. That's where our team has committed at this point. And it would be really hard to switch now because it has so much of my knowledge about how I work and what I reference regularly and the documents that I've uploaded that compounding has really taken place. Step two is pay for it can be the base tier. You don't need to spend a lot of money here, but do turn on a paid plan. And two core reasons for that. One is it'll get you access to the most up-to-date models, which are often not available or very limited in the usage you're allowed to have on the free models. But really critical, I would say, for the people in this room is it also gives you a lot more options in how your data is used. So you can toggle off what I call the training settings. So these are called different things in each tool. In ChatGPT, it's called data controls. In settings, in Claude, it's called help improve Claude, and it's in privacy. Happy to help anybody. Feel free to ping me if you have trouble with these. But what that means is that you can say, don't use my data to train this model. When you're using a free model, you're paying with your data. That's kind of the transaction that we're having, much like social media. When you're using a paid model, you have the option to opt out of that. And I for most of us, most of the time, that's what I would recommend. They both also offer incognito or temporary chats. So if you have kind of something that's particularly sensitive or that you don't want to be in its context for the future, that you don't want to have referenced, I recommend using an incognito or a temporary chat. It's just a way to kind of make sure that data doesn't get mixed in with what's also there. Just an important kind of nuance here to call out is that paying for a plan and opting into these privacy settings does not make this enterprise grade security by any means. It does not make it HIPAA compliant. Like there's a whole other webinar worth of conversation that we could have about security with these systems. So you still do need to be aware of what you're putting in and the sensitivity of that data, and know this is still the internet. You're not posting it publicly, but I would say, to the degree that you wouldn't put something in an email, I certainly wouldn't put it into ChatGPT. Just an important thing to keep in mind. This is a fun one because this almost feels in direct conflict with that last statement, but it's worth throwing out there, which is step three. Where possible, turn on connectors that are offered. So these tools can now connect to your calendar, your email, your Slack, your documents, all sorts of things. And again, this is a security appropriateness question that you need to have inside of your organization, and you'll know kind of what's appropriate for you. But where you can provide more context is where you really start to unlock the difference between the tool being kind of a neutral third party and it being a closer extension to your organization because it has all of that context. It goes from generic to knowing you. So if we go back to that example of writing a grant proposal, If you could share a folder, a Google Drive folder, or wherever it lives, of all of your recent grant proposals, and then you drop in a template of a new proposal that you need to write and say, help me draft this, instead of it needing to interview you and pull out all of the fields, it might have 80+% of it that it can repurpose from previous grant proposals just immediately. And then you can do what you're great at, which is write the very specific details that are going to connect to why this proposal is different. But that is the really big accelerator. Again, security balance, and it is a balance, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it because we're constantly thinking it through in our organization as well. But there's huge unlock opportunities there. If you're on your way to your tinkering zone, I would consider giving yourself a 30-day challenge. It's almost May. May can be your month. And just say, try to do a little bit of work with AI every day and try different tasks. So if you're usually ask it to help you with your emails, try something totally different. Try to ask it to help you build a spreadsheet or do some analysis or summarize a document that you don't have time to read at the moment, but you want a sense of what the next steps might be. And start to find those places, um, where it's really helping your work. Okay, some of you, I'm guessing, have passed tinkering and are thinking about what comes next. So I want to spend a minute talking about vibe coding because I'm sure at a minimum you've all heard the phrase, probably with various degrees of eye rolling. Oop, I accidentally changed slides. Sorry, guys. Um, so here's what vibe coding actually means. Basically, it means that anyone can now write code using natural language with no development experience. So you describe what you want in plain English, and the AI builds it. That's it. That's what vibe coding means. I think when you hear it in the news, sometimes it goes between sounding like this deeply negative thing or this deeply magical thing. It is neither of those. It is just a new way of creating things. It does not mean that we're done with engineers as we know it. There's still a meaningful gap between a vibe coded prototype and what most of us need in production, especially if we're touching anything sensitive in that data. But it does open up a ton of potential for people who have ideas or problems they want to solve, but not unlimited dev team access, which I would assume is all of us. So let's talk about a few use cases for those of you who might be thinking about tiptoeing into doing some vibe coding. Um, the first one I would think about is asking yourself, do you have a prototype? Do you have an idea that would be better explained as a clickable prototype? Instead of maybe a slide deck or a document, or you're working on something with a partner and you're just talking past each other and you're not quite connecting on what the idea is. This happened for us recently. We were working on some AEO kind of acceleration that we're helping our partners with, and they just didn't understand what we were offering. And so we mocked it up. And I have a full dev team, but it just still made sense to vibe code a quick thing that I could put in front of a partner and say, like, it would work like this-ish. And then they could give me some feedback way before we brought it to the team to fully spec out. And Jen, you had a great example from a partner on this one recently as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think one thing that comes up a lot in our work and maybe in your organization is that different teams, they have expertise in one area and different, and others have different expertise, and we speak different jargon as a result of that. And so I think the opportunity here is just to kind of get out of the telling and get into the showing much faster. And that's what happened with us, a particular client case. We had a lot of conversations around this kind of complex visualization that they really envisioned. And of course, that's a great opportunity for our incredible designers to hear and iterate. We had some unusual constraints in this case, and we all are working under unusual constraints a lot of the time these days. And so just as an accelerator, and again, in this experimentation and try way, we kind of took our best interpretation of what we thought they were asking for and brought it to ChatGPT and asked it to make a clickable prototype that could be used to just push that conversation forward faster. And again, don't want to discount the fact that this is what designers do day in and day out in their tools. As Alex said, though, there are folks, your organizations probably included, that maybe don't always have time or have access to that expertise. And in some cases, it can even help accelerate the conversations for those that do have that expertise. So, and I saw here in the chat one of our participants from Maine Historical Society, has already used tools to make wireframes, which is really cool. I think that idea of coming to your collaborative conversations either with your vendors, your design team, with something in mind, so you can get to that show versus tell conversation much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to use it for. Another use case to think about, we talked about looking at like a folder of meeting notes, but sometimes you want to analyze data at a larger scale. And maybe you need to use, something like a Python notebook to do that, which is not a programming language I write. But, I recently wanted to do this for a partner. We wanted to look back, we work with Parent Data and Emily Oster, and we wanted to look back at the last year of questions, which was over 400,000 of them. And similar to what we were talking about with what works for health, they wanted a kind of cluster analysis. They wanted to understand, how the questions were clustering and how that compared to how they structured their navigation on their site. And this was one of those questions where I told my partner, I have no idea if I can do this for you, but give me a minute. It took 20, as it turned out, which was amazing. And we got this incredible analysis using vibe coding to find exactly where those categories were. And we found some top level nav where they had almost no questions being asked, and an entire category that was missing that was a clear opportunity. So it's one of my another really great use cases. The last one is it's just sometimes you can build something for production if it's really simple. So, a simple one-page tool that isn't connected to your core systems or a landing page for an event. So I was thinking about this as we were organizing this webinar. If I was planning an event and I just wanted to collect RSVPs into a Google Sheet, that's a really quick thing to create using a vibe coded system and just roll out on a simple site. Kind of two tips to think about because I know this can be pretty intimidating. One is if you are working towards building more of a product or even a deeper prototype, take a little bit of time to write out your product requirements. So, in product development, we'd call this a PRD document. You don't need to know how to write one. Your AI can help you. You can literally say, help me write a PRD on this idea that I'm working on. And at the end of this, we're going to want to pass it off to X code system that we're using. Then let it ask you questions and poke holes in the plan and push you to simplify or decide what's in a V1. Because if you spend the kind of 20 minutes up front doing that, by the time you walk it over to Claude Code and hand it that document, you'll have a much cleaner path to building that first version versus like starting from the middle and then saying, oh, I forgot we need this connector. I forgot we needed a password. I forgot we needed this other thing. And the second one is, especially depending on your organization's kind of security needs, consider going personal before you go professional on your projects here. This ended up being a huge unlock for me because I found myself, we work with client data and I was still learning the ins and outs and nuances of these systems. And I wanted to learn them, but I wanted to learn them on my own space. And so I built a training app to help me get ready for the Brooklyn Half Marathon here in a few weeks. And it took about an hour, but it was a system taking my paper training plan, bumping it up against my calendar and my Strava account so I could see what my runs actually were and telling me exactly what my run should be to get me ready. And that's with no engineering background. It literally walked me through step by step. Here's how you set up this API. Here's how you deploy this to Versal. But once I built that, I had immense confidence to come back to my team and build something small for my team. And I've been laddering up in this way as I get comfortable with personal projects. Just one important caveat before we end this section, there is still a major gap between a working prototype and production ready, especially if you're talking about sensitive integrations or personally identifiable information. So, once you're handling constituent data, payment systems, anything like this, please do make sure that there are professional developers or a vendor involved who knows how to help you with those things. There's kind of an endless number of stories in the news these days of where this goes wrong in production. And so just kind of giving you that caveat, but you are still going to be kind of developing and learning and thinking about these things, even if you're doing it purely in a prototype environment.
And I know we're getting right up at the end of our time here. Um, just briefly want to kind of summarize some things for you, so you're taking away some nuggets. Everything that Alex just talked through, the tinkering zone, 30-day challenge, that's how you start. And we definitely advise that you bring these into your organization, bring these capabilities to in a more have the conversations to help you scale them in a more sustainable way. So really work with your IT, design, comms, legal teams, engineering teams, formalize how your staff is using these tools. Also, another way to get started right away is thinking about that content strategy, that EEAT, expertise, experience, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Um, uh, it might mean implementing natural language experiences in your sites. With a product like Dewey, it could also be done with something like an MCP server. That's a bit technical, but it's in that link that Cass dropped in. Or automating parts of your routines and workflow, finding that drudgery, using these emerging tools to gain some efficiencies. We obviously work with organizations like yours at every stage at that front. We do, and Dewey does, and we'd love to, have follow-up conversations with anybody that's interested in talking more. I do see one question, and it's a really, really good one in the chat about environmental impact. And I think this is the hard one, and I'm not going to act like I have some incredibly packaged up answer on it. I do think it's really important for you to think about your organization's mission and the goals that you're trying to achieve, and balancing that with what we know are actual real impacts. I could put a plug in for there's some incredible organizations that are tackling this. There's a product called Change Agent AI that has baked in the bias and impact environmental impacts directly into their product. There's dozens of others of other resources out there that can help guide you through those really difficult and real challenges.
Thank you,
And I think
Jen.
we are
Thank you,
over time.
Alex.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I know we're 1 minute over, so thank you so much. There was so much packed in here and such great information, so helpful. So, someone did ask if it's being recorded, and you will get it in your inbox within the next few days. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Alex or Jen would be happy to chat with you, or we can, respond via email, whatever works best for you. But thank you again for coming live, and I appreciate you both, Jen and Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you.